From Social Prosperity Partners, this is Community Catalyst. Welcome to Community Catalysts, the podcast that examines the qualities of community leadership and the many paths and forms it can take. I'm your host, Matt Lehrman. From 2011 to 2015, Otis White, founder and former CEO of Civic Strategies, created a podcast in collaboration with the Georgia Municipal Association. In his series, he interviewed various community leaders, exploring the hard-earned lessons from their efforts to achieve meaningful progress in their communities. As you can probably already tell, his work has been a significant inspiration for our podcast, and I am profoundly grateful to Otis White for allowing us to re-release his Civic Strategies interviews here so they can inspire and instruct a new generation of community leaders. In just a moment, we'll bring you an episode featuring Otis White in conversation with Denise Brinson, the Economic and Community Development Director for Suwanee, Georgia. They'll discuss how Suwanee transformed its downtown into a vibrant community hub. But before that, I had the pleasure of sitting down with Otis recently to hear him share some of the invaluable insights and lessons he's gathered over his remarkable career. If you were advising someone who was taking office as a mayor or a council member for the first time, what would you tell them are some of the first things that they should take the initiative to learn, maybe in the first 3 or 6 months on the job?
They really need to understand how the government works. They need to talk to the employees of the government. And that's because unless governments can do things faster, cheaper, and better all the time, people are not going to be satisfied. We need old-fashioned commitment to management to make governments work. So one of the first things I would do is get to know the people in the government to see what their ideas are about making things faster, cheaper, and better in the way government works. And then marry that with what you're learning from the citizens about what they want. And somewhere between the supply and the demand, you're going to come up with some creative insights into what the government can do.
One of the divisions that I frequently am asked to help councils and management negotiate is the distinction between an elected council whose job is to decide what the community should accomplish over time, and it's the staff's responsibility for how to accomplish that. How does a newly elected mayor or council member ask the staff a question that sounds like it broaches over into the realm of the council's responsibilities?
Well, there are different kinds of city governments. There's a strong mayor type of city government where the mayor is the manager, the top manager. Then there's the city manager form of government in which city city council members are strictly forbidden from speaking directly to the staff. So maybe in that case, you have to get the city manager to be comfortable with your simply learning what it is that all the departments do. And you just need to go at it with some humility and some respect for the lines of authority in government. But you still have an obligation to know, if I promise you that we're going to do this, we're pretty sure we can get it done. And I would think any city manager would be eager to let city council members know what the capacities are for the local government, so they're not promising things that can't be delivered.
I talk with a lot of council members, especially ones who are newly elected, and oftentimes what they tell me is that the first thing that they try to master is the city or the town budget. And they ask for the full briefing book, the full budget book, so they can see it. But it's overwhelming. It's a 3-ring binder, with, charts and stuff on both sides of every single page. It's jam-packed. In the very first episode of Community Catalysts, I interviewed a a woman who is both a council member and Presbyterian minister in her town in South Carolina. And one of the stories that she tells was how her church tried to get a particular zoning process through. She kind of recused herself from it. But it was such a learning experience for her because the proposal from the church, even though it had noble intentions, was defeated because the church and the people who were advancing this didn't understand the process. And I remember the question that I asked her was, as a council member, what do you take away from this? And her response was, boy, I need to put myself in the shoes of the people who are trying to do business with our town so that I understand really what's going on, that governance can't just be a top-down approach. It has to be something that we appreciate what it's like to actually engage with us.
Well, amen to the minister.
Otis, are there certain key qualities that you've observed in effective civic leaders individually?
Yeah, they tend to follow the Ted Lasso rule. Do you know the Ted Lasso rule? It is to be curious, not judgmental. And it is to ask a lot of questions. And again, respond back to folks with some understanding that you have heard them. Simply being curious, as Ted Lasso urged us, and not as judgmental, will take you a long way.
That's a great answer. Any others that you want to add to that?
Talk to people in other cities. Talk to your peers. You can learn a lot. If you're the mayor of Macon, Georgia, you can learn a lot by talking to the mayor of Augusta, Georgia, or the mayor of Athens, Georgia, or the mayor of Savannah, Georgia, or a mayor in another city. By the way, Matt, I used to do panels of mayors for the International Downtown Association. These are the organizations that represent downtowns across the country and actually around the world. And so for about 5 years, we did these panels, and we'd bring 3 or 4 mayors from around the country. Oh, and by the way, I didn't hurt these mayors' careers because 2 of them went to the Senate, and one of them became a governor. So clearly these were talented folks.
They obviously have you to thank for that, clearly.
Well, I tried not to harm. I do no harm was my first thing. But what we did was we put them in front of these downtown executives. So the title of the panel was always what I always wanted to know about being the mayor, but was afraid to ask. And so we let them ask, from the mayor's perspective, how do you deal with downtown issues? How do you reconcile downtowns versus neighborhoods? What do you do with opponents? What's the art of being a good mayor? And the mayors were amazing in their candor and their imparting of wisdom to these IDA members, but they were just as eager to meet each other because they wanted to hear from each other. So how do you solve this problem in your city? So this sort of openness to what can be learned from talking to your peers elsewhere also is an important part of becoming effective in government.
Otis, this is why you and I get along so well, because in my prior work in nonprofit arts and culture administration, I ran a program called Ask the Patrons. And we would put together a panel of real-life donors and audience members and put them in front of 100 or more arts fundraisers and marketers. And we built it as everything you always want to know about your audience, but was afraid to ask. And we got to ask questions like, how many times can we email you before we piss you off? And, it's important to ask our residents, to ask our customers, how we're doing for them.
And I don't know why mayors agreed to do these panels. I guess maybe it's a little bit of they're besieged by favor seekers. And this was not about favor seeking. This is really about understanding them. They were intrigued to participate in this, but they really loved meeting each other. They loved being around the other mayors.
You'll hear more from my interview with Otis White in future episodes, but for now, let's listen to the Civic Strategies conversation with Denise Brinson about creating the new town center in Suwanee, Georgia.
Hello and welcome to Civic Strategies, a podcast about cities and their leaders produced in cooperation with the Georgia Municipal Association. I'm Otis White. On our show today is Denise Brinson, Economic and Community Development Director of Suwanee, Georgia, a suburb that's about 30 miles northeast of Atlanta. What brings us here is that Suwanee has done something extraordinary for a modern city, and Denise was directly involved in it. But first, a little background on Suwanee. It's an old town, but also a relatively new city. It appears on maps as far back as 1817 and had a post office a few decades later, but it didn't become an incorporated city until 1949. And even then, it grew slowly until the 1990s, when it suddenly became a popular suburb. The result was that Suwanee still had traces of the farm town it once was, including a very small downtown along Main Street, but it didn't have enough parks, it didn't have a modern city hall, and it didn't have a place you could hold a festival or have a parade. And that's why Suwanee's leaders decided to do something very unusual in 2002. They decided to build a whole new downtown, a short distance from the old one, this time designed around a 10-acre city park that could hold up to 40,000 people for festivals and concerts. This new downtown, which is called Town Center, has a brand new city hall, commercial areas, retail, residential, and that park with an amphitheater, an interactive fountain, walkways, and large open spaces. The person who has been at the center of all of this is Denise Brinson, who came to work at the city a little over 13 years ago, just before these big decisions were made. So, Denise, welcome.
Thank you.
I want to ask you about the decision to build the new downtown, but first, tell us what happened to the old one.
The old one is still there. In fact, we consider it part of our downtown. We're actually in the process now of trying to figure out the best way to connect the two, both in a transportation way as well as mentally.
So the old downtown is called Old Town.
We call it Old Town.
And the new downtown is called Town Center.
Right. We also call Old Town our historic district. It has most of our historic core.
So take us back to 2002. How does a city decide to build a whole new downtown?
It really started in the comprehensive planning process in the late 90s. And at that time, we knew that we needed to do something different. We knew we were growing. In 2000, we were at about 8,000 people. Now we're just under 16,000. In 1990, we were at around 2,000. So you can tell from those numbers that we've grown a lot. And we just did not fit well in what is our Old Town area or our historic district. It started from the comprehensive plan. From that, we developed two other plans, a parks recreation needs assessment, as well as what we called our downtown master plan. And one plan centered on parks, the other plan centered on kind of creating what our plan was going to be for downtown. Both plans had elements of what you mentioned earlier, Town Center Park, which is a 10-acre urban-style park.
So there were two plans coming together.
Two plans coming together. Part of the parks plan was a decision to not be in the recreation business, but to build passive parks. And we needed to buy land, and we needed to really buy land now. With those numbers I gave you as far as population, we needed to act quickly. And that, combined with the downtown master plan at the time, really created this new town center.
This is truly a downtown. This is not just a city hall and a park. This is a commercial area. It's a residential area. One of the hurdles, I would think, in building a brand new downtown, rethinking it, building it for the 21st century, is somebody's got to pay for it. How do you finance a new downtown?
Very creatively. Part of what came out of that, the parks plan, we'll call it, the recreation needs assessment, was the need to issue bonds for parkland citywide. A portion of that was town center. We did a bond referendum in 2001 to issue $17.7 million in bonds to build parks in Suwanee. A portion of that, about $5 million, was spent on Town Center Park, and the rest was distributed around the city in various parks. We went from about 16 acres to over 350 acres. But the commercial area, the 13 acres that surround the park, we established a URA, an urban redevelopment agency, and issued bonds to purchase that property. And ultimately, we flipped it to a developer who would follow our vision, build the type of buildings and create the architecture that we wanted to do the commercial core. And then combined with that is 40 acres behind Town Center that was privately owned and is now developed into townhomes, single-family homes, traditional neighborhood development, over 200 housing units, I think around 225. But we partnered with that developer, zoned the total 65 acres to create Town Center.
So there was some general obligation money for land acquisition. There was the use of zoning. There was the use of partnerships with private interests. And then there was a sort of another creative use of zoning for a separate private interest that was adjacent to the parts that the city had owned.
The 13 acres, the commercial property, plus the acreage that City Hall sits on was the Urban Redevelopment Agency bonds. And we bought 13 acres. We sold 9. And then we actually, at that time, was able to make money on that sale and helped to build City Hall, the iconic building that you're sitting in now.
I think the thing that would puzzle a lot of folks is that in making any kind of big public policy decision, and I can't think of one in a city that would be bigger than let's build a new downtown, you have to manage the politics. That is, you have to get those who must say yes to actually say yes, and then you have to bring the public along on the decision. So let's start with the politics. Who had to say yes to all of this, and how did they come to say yes?
Well, at the beginning, remember the plans that we talked about. The comprehensive plan talked about a development such as this. The parks plan talked about a development like this. The downtown master plan talked about a development like this. So all 3 of those processes had lots of public input, mandatory public input and input that we went out and sought above and beyond what we had to create the plan. Now, to answer your question, ultimately, who had to say yes was the decision makers at the time, the city council in place at the time. And they had to make some very, very bold decisions. I mentioned a bond issue. We actually increased taxes through a bond referendum. Our tax rate went from 2.5 mils to 5.99 mils. So over 140% increase in our city taxes to fund this $17.7 million in bonds. You asked who had to say yes. The city council had to make that decision to be bold. Did every single person that they run into agree with that decision? Probably not.
Was the bond voted on by the public?
Yes. It was about 58% said yes, which in election terms is a very, very high rate. And while I wasn't involved in the grassroots get the citizens out to vote, but the city council was very engaged in getting people out to vote.
We now have a downtown. It is striking, I have to say. Seeing this for the first time, this is an astonishing accomplishment in a short period of time. People on board now? Are they happy about the new downtown?
I hear a lot. I live in the community. I work here. And gauging by the participation in our 40-some-odd events 2 weekends ago, we had a large-scale festival, had about 55,000 people here. We had a movie night less than a month ago. We just showed a movie in our park and had 6,000 people attend. On any given weekend day, if it's a gorgeous day on a Saturday afternoon, there will be 300 people in the park. I'm amazed at how people's habits are changing. Also, to answer your question, we do a lot of surveying. Every other year, we do a national citizen survey by an independent company that surveys what people think about our parks and what they think of our reputation. And the park is transforming for us. Not the park, town center in total, creating the downtown.
So it's given the city a real sense of identity and a gathering place.
Yes. Yes. In fact, we asked that question, why did you move to Suwanee? What made you choose Suwanee? And 81% of the people said the vibe was essential or very important. The reputation, 82% of the people said essential or very important. That amazes me. And that was in part created by the bold decision to create Town Center, to create a downtown, to create a sense of place that kids are going to identify with years down the road.
I know you must get delegations of folks who come here from other places that may be thinking about doing something similar to this. What do you tell them when they come here and they say, what are the lessons of building this?
There's lots of things, but thinking big, thinking long term, not getting caught up in the naysayers, but really looking at why you're building it. You're building it for your children, for your grandchildren. We tell people to be realistic and really analyze what can your community support now and in the next 10 years and the next 20 years. Hire experts, developing a URA, issuing bonds, creating the space that you see here took a lot of expertise outside of just the staff here, just outside of the elected officials. We went beyond and hired experts to help us. Now, we guided them very carefully through the process. And another thing is, I call it no guts, no glory. And while we don't do this for the glorification, it's very much a gutsy move. And it takes real leadership to do that. And last, private dollars do follow public investment. We made an investment in the park. One of our consultants called it building the beach. What we did for the commercial property, what we did for the residential property and back was built the beach. We created beachfront property by the public investment in this park.
And then the private investment came to the beach.
Correct.
Thank you, Denise. My guest has been Denise Brinson, Economic and Community Development Director of Suwanee, Georgia, talking about how to create a brand new downtown. This has been Civic Strategies. I'm Otis White. Thanks for listening.
Once again, I share my profound thanks and deep appreciation to Otis White for sharing his Civic Strategies podcast with listeners of Community Catalysts. You'll find a link to his Civic Strategies website in the program notes, and I encourage you to make good use of the wealth of insights and resources that he still offers there. This episode was produced by Kerry Lengel and edited by Nick Living the Dream Tantillo. Jenna Maisel is our production assistant. Our executive producer is John Little. I'm Matt Lehrman of Social Prosperity Partners. If you have a question, comment, or story to share, reach me at 602-688-2724 or podcast at socialprosperity.us. I'd love to hear from you. We'll be back soon with another Community Catalyst.